Tucker Carlson did something very interesting and informative. He asked the handful of Republican potential nominees for president some questions about the war in Ukraine. I mean, after all, that's kind of the most important national security issue our nation faces right now. He got responses from Donald Trump, Mike Pence, Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, Kristi Noem, Greg Abbott, Tim Scott, and Chris Christie. Now, first, it's pretty revealing that Ron DeSantis actually responded to this because he's been kind of demurring about this whole idea of running for president. The fact that he was willing to provide answers on a national security issue tells you he's that much closer to being a candidate. Even Tucker was pretty surprised that Ron DeSantis participated and surprised in his responses.
And then maybe the most newsworthy response that we received was from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. DeSantis has well-known views on many topics, of course, but until tonight, no one could really say with precision where he stood on the war in Ukraine, which is arguably the most important topic in the world. And now we know. DeSantis is adamantly opposed to the position that most Republicans in Washington have taken on Ukraine. DeSantis is not a neocon.
This question right here is incredibly important. Is opposing Russia in Ukraine in America's interest? I mean, isn't that the only question? Isn't that the exact question that every member of Congress should be asking? Here's his answer. While the U.S. has many vital national interests, securing our borders and addressing the crisis of readiness within our military, achieving energy security and independence, and checking the economic, cultural, and military power of the Chinese Communist Party, becoming further entangled in a territorial dispute between Ukraine and Russia is not one of them. The Biden administration's virtual blank check funding of this conflict for as long as it takes without any defined objectives or accountability distracts from our country's most pressing challenges. And then the next question was, what is America's objective in Ukraine? By the way, after how many tens of billions of dollars? Over $100 billion. Why shouldn't that be an easy question to answer? Every American citizen should be able to answer that question, but I bet you can't. Here's Governor DeSantis' answer. Without question, peace should be the objective. The U.S. should not provide assistance that could require the deployment of American troops or enable Ukraine to engage in offensive operations beyond its borders. F-16s and long-range missiles should therefore be off the table. These moves would risk explicitly drawing the United States into the conflict and drawing us closer to a hot war between the world's two largest nuclear powers. That risk is unacceptable. Let me just shorthand this. Bill Kristol is not happy with that answer. Which brings us to President Trump's answers to these questions. Now understand, President Trump just a little over 2 years ago was the man behind the desk in the Oval Office who actually had to deal with very important national security issues like this. How did he respond? Question, should the U.S. support regime change in Russia? No, we should support regime change in the United States. That's far more important. The Biden administration are the ones who got us into this mess. That's kind of classic Trump, isn't it? He added this. Both sides are weary and ready to make a deal. The meeting should start immediately. There is no time to spare. The death and destruction must end now. Let's face it, the subtext of all these questions, a conversation that's happening within the Republican Party, is where do you stand on the neocon question? Are you a conservative who believes in incredibly robust and proactive military presence around the world on America's behalf or on our allies' behalf? Or are you a little more reticent to commit our money, our equipment, our armaments, and our troops to these causes? This is a conversation every Republican should be having at the highest levels of our party, figuring out who our nominee is going to be, but also at our own kitchen tables. Tucker Carlson seems to be one of the only right-of-center journalists, or journalists anywhere, frankly, who actually wants to engage in this conversation. I wonder why.